The obsidian walls of the High Synod of Valera absorbed the light of the three dying suns that orbited the system, casting the grand chamber into a perpetual, suffocating twilight that seemed to weigh physically upon the shoulders of every delegate present. This was not a room designed for comfort. It was a theater of war, a cathedral of strategy where the fate of the Valeri Dominion had been decided for 10,000 cycles, carved from the bedrock of a moon that had seen more fleets launched than there were stars in the local cluster. The air was thick, recycled too many times, carrying the metallic tang of fear and the pheromonal scent of aggression that leaked from the glands of the high counselors. They were a towering species, the Valeri, built of dense muscle and chitinous plating, their forearms resting uneasily on the basalt tables that formed the concentric rings of the amphitheater. But today, their size, their history of conquest, and their legendary martial prowess meant nothing. Today, the silence in the room was louder than the orbital bombardment that had silenced the outer colonies. High Warlord Krukta stood at the center of the pit, his breathing ragged, the bioluminescent markings along his throat pulsing a dull, sickly violet, the color of shame. He looked up at the holographic projection hovering in the center of the room, a swirling, chaotic representation of the void sector borders. The red tide of the enemy, the biomechanical horror known only as the synapse scourge, was not just encroaching, it was devouring. It did not conquer, it erased. Where the scourge passed, planets were stripped to their molten cores, and the digital screams of dying civilizations were silenced by a static so absolute it felt like the universe itself was being unwritten. Krukta slammed a massive, clawed fist onto the podium, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the vaulted ceiling, causing the lesser scribes in the upper galleries to flinch. "We were promised salvation," Krukta growled, his voice a gravelly resonance that vibrated in the chest cavities of everyone present. "We sent the hyperwave distress beacon. We humbled ourselves. We broke the edict of isolation and begged the younger races for aid. We were told the Terrans answered. We were told the humans were coming." He swept his gaze across the assembly, his yellow eyes burning with a mixture of fury and despair. "And what do the long-range sensors report? What has the Terran Federation, in its infinite wisdom, dispatched to halt the apocalypse?" A silence stretched, painful and taut. It was Arch-Scholar Vrel, a frailer, older Valeri whose chitin had turned the gray of old ash, who answered. He did not look up from his data slate, his voice trembling with the cold logic of the inevitable. "One vessel, High Warlord." The whisper ran through the chamber like a sudden draft. One fleet, a junior commander asked from the second ring, hope making him foolish. "One grand armada. The Terrans are known for their industrial capacity, perhaps a suppression fleet." "No," Krukta spat, the word dripping with venom. "Not a fleet, not a wing, not a squadron, one single ship." The uproar was immediate. It was a cacophony of rage, a symphony of betrayed expectations. Delegates rose from their stone seats, their voices clashing in the acoustic perfection of the chamber. They called it an insult. They called it a gesture of mockery. The Valeri had committed their entire remaining military might to the blockade at the ocular gate, a defensive line that was crumbling by the hour. They needed millions of tons of durasteel. They needed railguns the size of skyscrapers. They needed bodies to throw into the meat grinder of the scourge. And the humans, those upstart primates from the water world who had preached about alliances and galactic stability, had sent a single ship. "It is a diplomatic courier," one general shouted over the din. "They come to negotiate our surrender. They come to watch us die and salvage our technology from the wreckage." "It is a scout," another roared. "They are testing the Scourge's reaction time. We are bait to them." Krukta raised his forearms, demanding silence, and slowly the noise subsided, replaced by the crushing weight of their reality. "It is neither," the warlord said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "It is an execution. By abandoning us, they execute us. The humans have calculated the odds, and they have found us wanting. They spend one ship to maintain the appearance of honor, knowing it will make no difference." He turned back to the hologram, watching the red tide inch closer to the Valera prime system. "Let the record show that when the darkness came, the Valeri stood alone. Let the record show that the humans are not the saviors they claim to be. They are cowards who hoard their fleets while their allies burn." But Arch-Scholar Vrel was still looking at his data slate, his large, dark eyes narrowing. As he parsed the telemetry streaming in from the outer sensor buoys, the readings were nonsensical. The human vessel had not dropped out of warp space at the perimeter like a standard military craft. It had not broadcast standard identification codes. It had simply appeared. One moment the space was empty, the next there was a displacement of vacuum so subtle the sensors had initially registered it as a sensor ghost. And the dimensions were wrong. It was too small. Far too small for a warship. It was smooth, devoid of the bristling weapon batteries that characterized Valeri or even standard Terran naval architecture. It looked less like a machine of war and more like a work of art, a sliver of silver light frozen against the backdrop of the void. "High Warlord," Vrel interrupted, his voice cutting through the lingering tension. "The human vessel. It is hailing us, not via hyperwave. It is broadcasting directly into the Synod's internal comms network. They have bypassed our encryption." Krukta stiffened. "Bypassed? That is impossible. The Synod is air-gapped. We are shielded by quantum cryptography that has stood for 1,000 years. They are waiting for permission to land," Vrel continued, ignoring the impossibility of it. "The pilot requests an audience, he says." Vrel paused, his mandibles twitching in confusion. "He says he is on a tight schedule." The sheer audacity stunned the room. The enemy was burning the stars at the edge of the system, and the human pilot was worried about a schedule. Krukta felt a vain throb in his temple. He wanted to order the orbital defense grid to vaporize the human ship. He wanted to scream defiance. But he was a strategist, and a strategist did not throw away even a single pawn, no matter how useless it seemed. "Let him land," Krukta hissed. "Let him come and stand before this council. Let him look into the eyes of the people his government has condemned to death. And then, when the scourge arrives, we will force him to watch the end with us." The wait was agonizing. The council chamber remained full, no delegate willing to leave their post, though the air grew stale. They watched the main view screen as the human ship descended through the violent, storm-racked atmosphere of Valera Prime. It did not burn with re-entry fire. It moved with an eerie, fluid grace, sliding through the air currents rather than fighting them. It landed on the great plaza outside the Synod, a speck of chrome against the monolithic black stone of the Capitol. When the heavy blast doors of the grand chamber groaned open, the sound was like the grinding of tectonic plates. The Valeri guards, towering figures in powered assault armor, stepped aside, their weapons lowered but ready. Through the dust and the shadows of the entrance, the human walked in. He was disappointingly small. That was the first thought that struck every alien mind in the room. He wore no armor. He carried no visible weapons. He was dressed in a simple, high-collared tunic of dark gray fabric that seemed to absorb the light, cut in a style that suggested austerity rather than military rank. He was older, his hair a shock of white against pale skin, his face lined with the kind of weariness that comes not from physical exertion, but from carrying heavy knowledge. He walked with a cane, a simple black rod, though he did not seem to need it for support. He walked to the center of the amphitheater, into the pit where High Warlord Krukta loomed over him like a mountain of rage. The human stopped. He looked around the room, meeting the gaze of the terrified, angry giants. He did not bow, he did not salute. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. "I am Kalen," the human said. His voice was not loud, but the acoustics of the room, or perhaps something else, carried it to the highest tier without effort. It was a calm voice, devoid of the martial bark the Valeri respected. "I represent the solitary core of the Terran Federation." Krukta leaned down, his face inches from the human, his hot breath washing over the small figure. "Where is the fleet?" Kalen blinked, his blue eyes mild. "There is no fleet, High Warlord." The confirmation sent a fresh wave of murmuring through the crowd. Krukta straightened up, laughing a harsh, barking sound. "So it is true. The Terrans send a sacrifice. Tell me, Kalen of the Solitary Core, do you know what approaches this system? Do you know that the Scourge consumes biomatter and technology alike? They are a swarm of billions, their ships blot out the stars, and you bring yourself." "I am aware of the Kyroxy swarm, what you call the Scourge," Kalen said, correcting the name with the tone of a teacher correcting a student. "We have tracked their migration for 3 centuries. They are efficient, voracious, and deeply misunderstood." "Misunderstood," a general from the Outer Rim shouted. "They ate my homeworld, they consumed my broodkin, do not speak to us of understand." "Ing Softskin." Kalen turned to the shouter, his expression softening into something like pity. "I mourn your loss, General, truly. The loss of potential is the universe's greatest tragedy, but fear often clouds the tactical display. You see an invasion, we see a malfunction." "Malfunction?" Krukta roared, losing his patience. "This is war, this is survival. If you have no ships, no railguns, no antimatter charges, then you are useless to us. Go back to your toy ship and flee while you can. We will die with our honor intact." Kalen sighed, a sound that seemed to rattle in his chest. He looked at the floor, tapping his cane once against the stone. "We used to build fleets," he said quietly. The room did not go silent because he commanded it. It went silent because the tone of his voice changed. It shifted from diplomatic to something ancient. "We built the greatest fleets this galaxy had ever seen. The armada of the third expansion. Millions of ships, dreadnoughts that could crack moons. We thought that safety lay in the projection of power. We thought that if we had enough guns, enough hulls, enough soldiers, we would be safe." He looked up, and for the first time, Krukta felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. The human's eyes were old, incredibly, terrifyingly old. "And then we met the Usher," Kalen continued. "They were like the Scourge, aggressive, numerous. We fought them for 50 years. We turned 12 star systems into dust. We burned nebulas, and when the smoke cleared and we stood victorious over the ashes of a civilization, we realized something. We realized that for every ship we built, the universe built a better weapon. For every shield we invented, the universe invented a better spear. Escalation is a trap, High Warlord. It is a loop that ends only in silence." "So you gave up?" Krukta sneered, though his voice lacked its previous conviction. "You became pacifists." "No," Kalen said. "We grew up. We realized that sending a fleet is an admission of failure. It means you have failed to solve the problem, so you are attempting to bury it under tonnage. It means you are fighting the symptoms, not the cause. We disbanded the Grand Armada. We scrapped the dreadnoughts. And we invested everything, our resources, our minds, our very souls, into understanding the fundamental constants of reality." The room was baffled. They were warriors, not philosophers. They did not understand what this small creature was saying. Suddenly, the red alert klaxon screamed. The sound was a physical blow, a jarring, dissonant shriek that meant only one thing. "They are here," Vrel shouted from the console, his voice cracking. "The Scourge, they have exited warp inside the gravity well. They are bypassing the outer defenses. Impact in, by the ancestors. Impact in 10 minutes. The hologram in the center of the room shifted. The red tide was no longer a simulation. It was real. The sensors showed a cloud of vessels so dense they registered as a solid mass. They were biomechanical nightmares, ships made of bone and steel, trailing tendrils of green plasma. They swarmed toward Valera Prime like locusts descending on a harvest. "Scramble the fighters," Krukta bellowed, falling back into his command protocols. "Charge the planetary batteries, all civilians to the bunkers. Today we die." He looked down at the human. "And you will die first." Kalen did not move. He did not look at the screen. He looked at his pocket watch, a primitive mechanical device he had pulled from his tunic. "They are early," he muttered, impatient. "Are you insane?" Krukta grabbed the human by the shoulder, his claws digging into the fabric. "Look at the screen. There are millions of them. What can you do?" Kalen gently removed the warlord's hand. His grip was surprisingly firm, like steel wrapped in velvet. "I told you, High Warlord, I don't need a fleet. Fleets are for fighting. I am not here to fight." He tapped his cane on the ground again. "I am here to fix." "Vrel," Kalen said, his voice cutting through the panic. "Patch my ship's telemetry into your main view screen. Overlay it with the enemy fleet." "Why should I?" Vrel began. "Do it," Krukta ordered, desperate for anything, any distraction from the oncoming death. The screen flickered. The tactical overlay changed. The red mass of the enemy fleet was still there, terrifying and vast. But now, superimposed over it, was a series of blue lines, a complex geometric web that seemed to emanate from the small human ship sitting on the landing pad outside. The web spread out, encompassing the entire Valeri system, intersecting with the gravity wells of the suns, the planets, and the enemy fleet. "What is this?" Krukta asked. "Mathematics," Kalen said. "The language of the cosmos." He adjusted his collar. "You see, the Kyroxy, the Scourge, they operate on a hive mind frequency, a very specific, very loud quantum resonance. It's how they coordinate 1 billion ships without crashing into each other. It's their strength. But in engineering, High Warlord, every strength is a structural weakness if you apply the right pressure." "They are firing," a sensor officer screamed. "Plasma torpedoes, millions of them, impact in 30 seconds. The sky above the obsidian roof of the Synod turned a sickly green as the atmosphere began to burn. The ground shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The Valeri huddled, waiting for the end. Kalen closed his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, flat device. It looked like a remote control with a single red button. "Human," Krukta screamed, Do something. I am, Kalen whispered. I am editing the variable. He pressed the button. There was no explosion. There was no flash of light. There was no thunderous roar of a superweapon. There was a sound, a single pure resonant tone, hum. It was felt more than heard. It vibrated in the teeth of the Valeri. It resonated in the marrow of their bones. It was a sound of absolute harmony, a perfect C-sharp that seemed to stretch on for eternity, though it lasted only a second. On the view screen, the impossible happened. The millions of plasma torpedoes, moments away from turning the capital into a crater, simply stopped. They didn't detonate. They didn't fizzle out. They stopped moving. They hung in the air, frozen in time, their fiery tails motionless. Then the enemy fleet, the massive bioships driving forward with engines capable of crushing star systems, halted. It was as if the universe had pressed pause. What did you do?" Vrel whispered, his eyes wide, his data slate slipping from his fingers. "The sensors, the laws of physics, they are reading zero inertia, everywhere within the system." "I didn't destroy them," Kalen said, opening his eyes. He looked tired. Using the device seemed to drain him. "I introduced a dissonance into their local reality bubble. I localized a stasis field using the gravity of your dying stars as a lens. Essentially, I put them in timeout." Krukta stared at the screen. The greatest armada in history, the devourers of worlds, frozen like insects in amber. Timeout. "It won't hold forever," Kalen said, walking toward the exit of the pit. "Maybe an hour, maybe two, but that's not the point." "Then we must fire," Krukta shouted, the bloodlust returning. "They are helpless, we can slaughter them." "No," Kalen said sharply. The command in his voice froze Krukta in place. "If you fire on them, you break the stasis, you wake them up, and then you die." "Then what is the plan?" the warlord demanded. "You stop them, good, but they are still there. When they wake up, they will kill us." Kalen reached the edge of the pit and turned back. "They aren't attacking you because they hate you, Krukta. They are attacking you because they are running." The statement hung in the air, heavy and confusing. "Running?" Vril asked. "From what?" "That," Kalen said, pointing upward, "is why I am here. The scourge is a symptom. The Terran Federation doesn't fight symptoms. We treat the disease." He gestured for the High Council to follow him. "Come. My shuttle has better sensors than this stone tomb. I need to show you what is behind the scourge. I need to show you why we stopped building fleets and started building other things." The journey to the human ship was a daze for the Valeri High Command. They walked through the frozen city. They saw plasma bolts hanging suspended in the air above the streets, casting eerie green shadows on the pavement. Civilians were looking up, weeping, confused, terrified. The silence of the battlefield was more unnerving than the noise of war. Inside the human ship, the Axiom, the aesthetic was shockingly different. There were no cramped corridors, no exposed pipes, no utilitarian bulkheads. The interior was white, clean, and curved. The walls seemed to be made of light. The bridge was a simple room with a panoramic view of the frozen battle above. Kalen sat in a chair that molded to his form. His fingers danced across a console that had no buttons, only floating holograms of light. "We detected the disturbance 40 years ago," Kalen explained as the viewscreen zoomed past the frozen Scourge fleet, past the edge of the Valeri system, into the deep, dark void between the spiral arms of the galaxy. The Kyroxy, the Scourge, lived in the outer rim, peaceful actually, agrarian. Then something started eating their stars. "Eating stars?" Krukta asked, his voice hushed. He felt very small in this white room. "Not eating," Kalen corrected. "Unmaking, look." On the screen, a section of the star map was black, not the black of space, which is filled with background radiation and distant light. This was a true black, a void, a hole in the fabric of the universe, and it was growing. "We call it the null horizon," Kalen said. "It's a rupture in the dimensional membrane, entrop. Why accelerated by a factor of 1 billion? It's erasing reality. The Kyroxy were fleeing it. They were pushing into your territory not to conquer, but because the floor was falling out from under them. They are panicked animals trapped in a burning barn." "And you," Vrel swallowed hard, "you knew this." "We suspected," Kalen said. "The stasis field I used, it's not a weapon, it's a calibration tool. I needed to pause them so I could talk to them." "Talk to them?" Krukta asked incredulously. "They are monsters." "They are scared," Kalen said softly, "and right now they are listening." He tapped a sequence of lights. This ship, the Axiom, is effectively a giant translator. I am broadcasting a signal into the hive mind. I am showing them the null horizon. I am showing them that we know, and I am offering them a deal. What deal? Sanctuary, Kalen said. We have uninhabited systems in the Terran sector. We can relocate them. We can use our logistical networks to feed them. We can save them. You would save the monsters that butchered our colonies, Krukta growled, his honor offended. Kalen spun his chair around. If we kill them, Krukta, we waste energy, we waste time. And then when the null horizon reaches here, who will help us stop it? The Kyroxi have ships that can survive near-event horizon conditions. We have the physics to seal the breach. You have the raw materials and the industrial might to build the containment anchors. We don't need fewer species in this galaxy. We need everyone. The logic struck Krukta like a physical blow. The humans had not sent a fleet to fight a war. They had sent a diplomat to end it so they could recruit the armies for the real war. The war against nothingness. They are responding, Kalen said, looking at the console. The Queen Node, she is confused. She thought you were blocking their escape. She accepts the parley. Outside, the sky changed. The frozen plasma bolts dissolved into harmless vapor. The massive ships of the Scourge began to turn. They did not fire. They rotated, their weapons powering down, their formation shifting from an arrowhead of attack to a defensive sphere. The stasis is lifting, Kalen said. They are standing down. The Valeri warlord stared at the human. He looked at the small, frail creature who had just stopped an apocalypse with a button and a conversation. He realized then why the Terrans didn't build fleets anymore. Fleets were clumsy. Fleets were for children throwing rocks. The humans had become architects. They didn't play the game, they changed the board. You said, Krukta began, his voice rasping, that you need us to build containment anchors. Kalen nodded. The null horizon is coming. It will be here in 2 years. We have the blueprints. We have the science. But we need the Valeri steel. We need your strength. The Terrans can design the wall, but we need the Valeri to build it. Krukta looked out at the enemy fleet, which was now waiting, docile, awaiting coordinates for Sanctuary. He looked at the black void on the map. He felt the fear of the unknown, but for the first time in months he did not feel despair. He felt purpose. The Valeri do not build walls, Krukta grunted, straightening his spine. We build fortresses. Kalen smiled, a genuine, tired smile. A fortress will do nicely. The human stood up, leaning on his cane. Now, High Warlord, about that diplomatic reception, I believe I was promised a drink, and we have a lot of work to do. As they walked out of the Axiom, back into the dark air of Valera Prime, the warlord looked at the sky. The red tide was gone, replaced by the flickering lights of a truce. He looked at the single human ship. They had thought the humans needed a fleet to save them. They were so wrong. The humans didn't need a fleet because they were something far more dangerous. They were the ones who decided who needed saving. And as the warlord looked at the encroaching blackness on the star map in his mind, he realized something else. The humans hadn't just saved the Valeri. They had drafted them. The real war was just beginning, and for the first time in history, the galaxy wasn't fighting itself. It was fighting for its right to exist. Ambassador, Krukta said, the title feeling strange on his tongue. If we survive this, if we seal this breach. Yes, Kalen asked, pausing on the ramp. Teach us, Krukta said. Teach us how to stop building fleets. Kalen looked up at the dying suns, his eyes reflecting the light of a future that was no longer impossible. First, we survived the dark. Then we learned to be the light. One step at a time, warlord, one step at a time. The wind howled across the obsidian plains, but it no longer sounded like a death knell. It sounded like the first breath of a new age, the age of unity, the age where the monsters, the warriors, and the architects stood together against the void and held the line. The chamber of the High Synod W. As quiet now, but it was a busy quiet. The silence of terror had been replaced by the silence of concentration. Archscholar Vrel was already uploading the schematics from the human drive. Generals were becoming engineers. The Scourge was becoming a workforce. Kalen Vance, the solitary envoy of Earth, sat in the corner of the room watching them. He took a sip of the harsh, burning Valeri liquor they had brought him. It tasted like battery acid and victory. He checked his schedule. He was behind. But looking at the cooperation unfolding before him, he decided the universe could wait a few minutes. After all, they had just won the war without firing a shot. Now came the hard part, peace. And for that, they would need everything they had, Not a fleet of ships, but a fleet of minds, and that was a force the void could never consume. The galaxy spun on, the stars burned, and on a dark rock near a dying sun, a human and an alien began to draw up the plans to save tomorrow. The weeks following the Battle of the Stillness, as the Valeri historians had already named the non-event, were a blur of activity that defied every precedent in galactic history. The integration of the Kyroxy swarm into the logistical framework of the Alliance was a nightmare of translation and biology, but it was happening. The bioships, once feared as harbingers of death, were now being repurposed as massive haulers. Their organic hulls, capable of regenerating from damage that would shatter durasteel, were perfect for transport through the hazardous debris fields near the null horizon. Kalen spent his days in the High Synod, which had been transformed from a war room into a grand architectural studio. The center pit, once reserved for the warlord to scream orders, was now dominated by a massive, real-time simulation of the cosmic rupture. The gravity shear here, Vrel pointed to a swirling vortex of data on the display, is immense. It shreds standard matter. How do the Terrans propose we anchor the containment field? Kalen leaned over the display, his eyes tired but sharp. We don't use matter. We use condensed time. The anchors aren't physical pillars, Vrel. They are temporal buoys. We slow down the degradation of space in localized pockets, creating a lattice of stability. We essentially freeze the rot. Vrel's mandibles clicked in a rhythm of awe. Condensed time. We spent 1,000 years perfecting the railgun, and you were bottling seconds. We had to, Kalen murmured. We nearly ran out of them. Krukhtha approached the table, his heavy footsteps echoing. He was no longer wearing his ceremonial battle plate. He wore a utilitarian engineer's harness, covered in dust and grease. He looked less like a king and more like a leader. The first shipment of refined neutronium is ready, Krukhtha rumbled. The Kyroxy drones are loading it now. My pilots are flying wing-to-wing with the bioships to guide them. He paused, shaking his massive head. If you had told me a month ago I would be coordinating freight with the Scourge, I would have torn your head off. Adaptability is the hallmark of intelligence, Kalen said without looking up. Ambassador, Krukhtha said, his tone more serious. We have a problem, a political one. Kalen straightened up. Oh. The other empires, Krukhtha said. The Zentari Collective, the Iron Hegemony. They have detected the energy signatures of the Axiom's little demonstration, and they have seen the movement of the Kyroxy. They do not believe in the null horizon. They believe the Valeri and the Terrans have allied with the Scourge to conquer the sector. They are mobilizing. Kalen sighed, rubbing his temples. Of course they are. Fear is easier than trust. They have summoned a grand conclave, Krukhtha continued. At the neutral station of Ocular Prime, they demand an explanation. They demand we surrender the Kyroxy fleet for destruction, or they will declare war on us both. Another war, Vrel whispered, horrified. We cannot fight the hegemony and the null horizon at the same time. We won't have to, Kalen said. He picked up his cane. We're going to the conclave. With what army? Krukhtha asked. My forces are stripping armor to build the anchors. We are vulnerable. We don't go with an army, Kalen said, walking toward the door. We go with the truth, and if that doesn't work... He paused, a glint of steel in his eyes that reminded Krukhtha that this small creature was a predator in his own right. If that doesn't work, I'll have to show them what happens when the solitary core stops being polite. Ocular Prime was a station built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, a glittering jewel of commerce and diplomacy located at the crossroads of 4 major galactic territories. The Grand Hall was vast, designed to accommodate species of all sizes, from the insectoid Zentari to the gaseous entities of the Nebula Guild. Today, the hall was hostile. As Kalen, Krukhtha, and a small delegation of Valeri entered, the hostility was palpable. Thousands of eyes, sensors, and sensory stalks turned toward them. The representative of the Iron Hegemony, a cyborg behemoth named General Steelhide, stood on the central podium. The traitors arrive, Steelhide boomed, his voice amplified by speakers. They walk among us with the stench of the Scourge upon them. We come to explain, Krukhtha shouted back, his voice booming without amplification. We come to warn you. Warn us? The Zentari matriarch chattered from her high perch. You ally with the Eaters of Worlds, you weaponize them. We have seen the sensor logs. The Valeri modify the Scourge ships. You prepare for conquest. We prepare for survival? Kalen stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but he tapped a small device on his collar, and suddenly his voice filled the hall, perfectly modulated. The Scourge are refugees. The real threat is the Null Horizon. A myth, Steelhide scoffed. A Terran fabrication to distract us while you maneuver your fleets. We know the Terrans. You are weak. You sent one ship to Valera. You have no military left. You rely on trickery. Kalen walked to the center of the room. He looked small, surrounded by the holographic flags of a dozen angry empires. You say we are weak because we have no fleets, Kalen addressed the room. You say we rely on trickery. Let me ask you a question, General Steelhide. How much energy does your flagship output? My flagship, the Iron Will, outputs 4 terawatts of directed plasma energy, Steelhide bragged. Enough to boil an ocean. Impressive, Kalen said dryly. And you, Matriarch, your hive ships. We command the kinetic force of a meteor swarm, she hissed. Fleets, Kalen said, nodding. Power measured in destruction, power measured in how much you can break. He looked around the room. The Terran Federation does not measure power in destruction anymore. We measure it in control. Enough philosophy, Steelhide raised a massive cannon arm. Surrender the Scourge fleet or we open fire on the Valeri systems. We have 3,000 ships in orbit of this station. You have a shuttle and a diplomat. Kalen looked at Kruktha. The warlord was tense, ready to fight, but he nodded. He trusted the human. Kalen turned back to Steelhide. I cannot surrender the Scourge. They are free citizens now, and I cannot allow you to attack the Valeri. They are the only thing standing between you and the end of the universe. Then you die, Steelhide declared. All ships lock weapons on the Valeri delegation's transport. Prepare to. General, Kalen said, check your sensors. What? Check your sensors. Steelhide paused. He linked with his ship in orbit. What is this? Every screen in the Grand Hall shifted. The view from outside the station showed the 3,000 warships of the Iron Hegemony and the Zentari Collective. They were drifting. My engines are offline, a captain shouted over the comms. We have lost main power, another screamed. We are drifting. Who is attacking us? Steelhide roared. I see no ships. Where is the Terran fleet? There is no fleet, Kalen said calmly. I told you we don't use them. He tapped his cane on the floor. During my approach, Kalen explained, the Axiom deployed a swarm of nanoscopic inhibitors, about 4 trillion of them. They are currently adhering to the antimatter injectors of every single ship in your armada. They haven't destroyed your engines. They have simply dampened the reaction. If you try to fire, the reaction will stall. If you try to move, you will drift. The room was silent. 3,000 warships, the might of the sector, neutralized by a cloud of dust they couldn't even see. This is dishonorable, Steelhide bellowed. This is cowardice. This is mercy, Kalen snapped, his voice suddenly hard. Cowardice would be letting you start a war you can't win. Cowardice would be letting you waste resources while the universe unzips itself at the seam. I disarmed you because you were behaving like children with loaded weapons. He walked up to the podium, forcing the cyborg general to step back. Kalen activated the main projector. The image of the Null Horizon, the growing black hole of reality, filled the air. This, Kalen pointed, is the enemy. It doesn't care about your borders, it doesn't care about your flags or your honor. It eats physics, it eats history, and it is coming. He looked at the assembly. I have neutralized your fleets. I can keep them neutralized for as long as I wish, or I can release them, but only if you turn them toward the horizon. We need your engines to tow the containment anchors. We need your shields to buffer the radiation storms. We need you. The Zentari matriarch looked at the terrifying black void on the screen. If we refuse, then you drift here until the horizon comes and swallows you, Kalen said simply. The Valeri and the Terrans will try to save the galaxy without you. But we might fail, and if we fail, you die. If we succeed, you live with the shame that you stood by while others held up the sky. Silence reigned. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Then slowly the Iron General lowered his arm cannon. You claim this horizon threatens the hegemony. It threatens existence, Kalen said. Steelhide grunted. The Iron Hegemony does not flee from a threat. If this void seeks to consume us, we will break it. Good, Kalen said. He tapped his cane again. Inhibitors released, you have your ships back. The alarms in the room ceased. The lights on the consoles turned green. The power returned. Kalen looked at Krukta. The Valeri warlord was grinning, a terrifying sight involving too many teeth. "You terrify me, human," Krukta whispered. "I'm just a diplomat," Kalen said with a wink. "Come on, we have a universe to fix." The great work, as it came to be known, took 3 years. It was an endeavor that reshaped the political and physical geography of the sector. The Valeri provided the raw mass, asteroids smelted down into pillars of superdense alloy. The Iron Hegemony provided the thrust, thousands of warships acting as tugboats, dragging the massive structures into position around the tier in space. The Zentari provided the coordination, their hive mind perfect for managing the billions of microcalculations needed to align the lattice. And the humans provided the glue. The Axiom, joined by 2 other solitary core vessels, the Paradox and the Epitaph, wove the temporal fields. They danced through the radiation storms of the null horizon, stitching space-time back together with beams of coherent chronons. It was dangerous. Ships were lost. Valeri engineers died when anchors slipped. Hegemony captains burned out their engines holding the line against the gravitational shear. But for the first time in 10,000 years, they died for each other. The climax came on the final day. The null horizon had expanded, a screaming mouth of nothingness that threatened to swallow the Valeri system. The containment lattice was in place, but it needed a kickstart. It needed a massive injection of energy to fuse the temporal fields and seal the breach. "We don't have enough power," Vrel reported from the central control hub on the Axiom. "The Hegemony fleets are drained. The solar capacitors are empty. We are short by 40%. Kalen stood on the bridge watching the swirling vortex. It was beautiful in a horrific way. "We need a spark." "A spark?" Krukta asked over the comms from his position on the lead anchor. "We need a supernova, Kalen." "No," Kalen said softly. "We need a resonance." He turned to Vrel. "Contact the Kyroxy Queen, the Scourge." "The Haulers?" Vrel asked. "They have no weapons, they have no energy projectors." "They have a voice," Kalen said. "The hive mind, it's a psychic resonance field if they scream all of them at once directed at the lattice. It might create a psionic feedback loop, pure energy." "It might kill them," Vrel said. "Ask her," Kalen said. The channel opened. The Queen Node spoke, her voice a chorus of 1,000,000,000 whispers. Kalen explained the plan. He explained that they needed the Scourge to scream defiance at the void that had chased them from their home. There was a pause, then the Queen spoke. "We run no more, we sing." "All ships brace for impact," Kalen ordered. The Kyroxy fleet, thousands of organic ships, formed a sphere around the null horizon. And then they screamed. It wasn't a sound audible to the ear. It was a psychic shockwave. It was the collective will of a species that refused to die. It hit the containment lattice like a hammer. The anchors glowed white-hot. The temporal fields ignited. The web of light tightened. The null horizon fought back. Reality buckled. Gravity waves smashed into the Hegemony ships, crushing hulls. But they held. Steelhide roared orders, keeping his formation tight. Krukta manually locked the final clamps, his armor melting from the heat. And then, with a flash that was seen across half the galaxy, the breach snapped shut. The black void vanished, replaced by the bruised but stable purple of normal space. Silence returned, but this time it was the silence of peace. On the bridge of the Axiom, Kalen collapsed into his chair. His cane fell to the floor. He was exhausted, his body trembling. "Status," he whispered. "Stable," Vrel said, his voice full of tears. "The horizon is sealed. The readings are normal. We did it." Krukta's voice crackled over the comms. "Ambassador, Kalen, are you there?" "I'm here, Warlord," Kalen said. That, Krukta laughed, a deep, booming sound, was better than any war. The ceremony at the High Synod was attended by every species in the sector. There were no weapons allowed, not by law, but by unspoken agreement. They didn't need them. Kalen stood on the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. Valeri, Zentari, human, Kyroxy, Iron Hegemony. They were different, vast, strange, and beautiful. Krukta stood beside him. The warlord had commissioned a statue in the center of the capital. It wasn't of a warrior. It was of a human, small and frail, holding a cane, looking up at the stars. "They thought we needed a fleet," Krukta said to the crowd. "They looked at the humans and saw weakness. They saw a lack of guns. They saw a lack of armor." He placed a massive hand on Kalen's shoulder. "But they were wrong. the warlord continued. The humans brought the only weapon that matters. They brought the will to solve the problem rather than destroy it. They taught us that a fleet is a tool of fear, but unity is a tool of creation. Kalen stepped forward. He didn't use a microphone. He didn't need to. The acoustics of the room and the respect of the galaxy carried his voice. We look at the stars, Kalen said, and we see the dark. It is easy to be afraid. It is easy to build walls and guns, but the dark is not an enemy. It is just the absence of light. And we. He looked at Kruktha, at Steelhide, at the Kyroxy Queen's avatar. We are the light. As long as we stand together, the dark cannot win. He picked up his cane and smiled. Now, he said, who wants to help me figure out what's on the other side of that sealed breach? Because I'm getting some very interesting readings. The laughter that filled the hall was the sound of a galaxy that had learned to stop fighting and start living. And in the orbit of Valera Prime, the single human ship, the Axiom, sat silent and small, casting a shadow larger than any dreadnought. They had expected a fleet. They got a future.